That's an interesting concept. A lot of my history is with retailers and with big manufacturers where I've been a technical director. And the board look at you. If you've got 2,000 people in your factory, the board look at you and think, well, you're the person in charge of food safety. And I always say, no, I'm not. Welcome to Highfield Food Safety Bitesize, with myself, Sterling Crew, and with Richard Sprenger. And today, Richard, there is another subject that is really close to your heart, which is person in charge. So could you tell us about what person in charge is and what type of countries operate that type of system?
Person in charge of food safety. It's a requirement in the USA that every food business should have a person in charge. It's also, for the last 12, 15 years, been mandatory in Dubai, where I'm based, that every food business has to have a person in charge. Now, Australia also, I think, has a few states. Most countries, and notably the UK, don't have to have a person in charge of food safety. The person in charge is somebody who is trained, usually to about level 3. So it's got to usually be a manager. It's somebody who works in the food production area or in the kitchen. They've got to be based in the kitchen, and they've got to be responsible for the staff, and they've got to be trained to a level of at least level 3 food safety, and they are responsible for the food safety within the business at all times. If you've got 2 separate shifts, you have to have 2 person in charge.
So it's in the American Food Code, which we were discussing in our Highfield webinar earlier on. So what are the qualities you're looking for in a person in charge?
Well, you're looking for somebody certainly that has to be knowledgeable in food safety. And that's one of the biggest drawbacks. As you know, anybody can set up a food business in the UK and have no knowledge about food safety. Can you imagine having a plumber come to the door and say, I've come to fix a leak? And you say, what do you know about plumbing? And he said, oh, nothing. I'm just starting. And that's the problem. So the main criteria is to be knowledgeable about food safety, particularly with regard to the hazards and controls of the business that you're operating in. And the other main thing is they've got to be a leader and an effective manager to make sure that the staff are all implementing the good practices that they should have learned through their training.
Absolutely. So it's not a tick in the box, which is one things we're always concerned about. I'm trained, I'm now a PIC, and there's my tick in the box. You've got to be able to implement change, don't you? You have to be able to convince your staff and win the hearts and minds of what they have to do. And I think it's just almost as much as to be passionate about what you do and to be a good communicator as it is to have that cognitive knowledge, to have the knowledge.
Exactly. Yeah. And that's something we try to bring into our courses now, now that we're delivering, is the management aspect of it, the behavior aspect of it, and culture. We're bringing all sorts of other things into the courses, and people like the person in charge, in addition to just straightforward technical knowledge about food safety. It's all important in the overall improving food safety.
A number of times I've gone into hospitality or catering outlets, and if you're talking about, what knowledge do you have? What capability do the staff have? Which to me is really important. I've always thought, safe people are safe food. And so the food handler is so important in this. And when I talk to the food handlers, they can say, look, here's my certificate. I've done level 2, I've done level 3. But when you actually go up the management chain, sometimes you actually find the person that's the manager has no qualifications or little knowledge, because they almost say, well, that's a food handler's job. It's not my job. My job is a manager to manage the operation rather than to get involved in food safety. Do you see that sometimes the person in charge, if you're looking at the UK, doesn't necessarily have the information and the qualifications as the food handler they're managing?
So that is one of the problems. A lot of countries have emphasised the need for training for all food handlers to say level 2 food safety. There isn't the same drive or demand for the supervisors and the managers to have level 3 food safety, which I think is even more important, because if there's a breakdown in hygiene, 95% of the time it's a management responsibility, either for not training the staff or supervising the staff. But you've got to be careful about how far up the chain you go, because you can't expect the managing director of major food businesses to be a food safety specialist. They're not going to be, but they've got to have somebody who does manage the staff, middle management in particular, that somebody is well qualified in food safety. And then obviously you've got hygiene managers as well in some organisations, big organisations. The hygiene manager is different from the person in charge of food safety. The hygiene manager doesn't have control of staff, generally speaking. And the hygiene manager doesn't work in the kitchen. They work in their own office. So the manager in charge, the person in charge, can't be the hygiene manager.
That's an interesting concept. A lot of my history is with retailers and with big manufacturers where I've been a technical director. And, you know, the board look at you. If you've got 2,000 people in your factory, the board look at you and think, well, you're the, you know, person in charge of food safety. And I always say, no, I'm not. I'm here to give support. I'm here to give direction. You know, I'm here to drive continuous improvement and win hearts and minds, but actually everybody has to have some level of training or awareness. And normally, if you look at in factories, the person in charge is normally the operations director. You know, somebody is at a board level who is managing the vast majority of that food source. And I will see my role there as supporting him in his role as the person in charge, like on HACCP teams. I always think on a HACCP team, if you're in a big organisation, that it's the technical people normally get stuck into chairing it. But actually, I always think it's the operations people, it's the people who do the do that really have the most clout and have the most knowledge. And technically, you're there to support them, as I say, with either educating the teams or making sure the systems are working. But a good idea then, isn't it, this person in charge? I like the idea, and hopefully I'd like to see it in the UK one day. I think it's
I'd love the FSA to take it on board. I think it's the most important single factor that we could introduce into food safety legislation to really make a difference, improve food safety and cut the problems of food complaints, food fraud, and all the other things that we've got, obviously food poisoning. Interesting you say about manufacturing. Manufacturing, as you know, is an entirely different hygiene structure to catering. Because the people responsible for hygiene, generally speaking, within manufacturing are quality assurance and quality control, and they have no responsibility, direct line responsibility for the production staff. As you said, it's production manager who looks after the staff. So if you wanted to bring in a person in charge system into a manufacturing area, then you'd have to bring it into the production people, because it's what you're trying to do is ensure that all the food handlers are operating best practice. So it's the management of those people. So manufacturing is a bit different from catering and retail.
But I think the principles are still the same.
Principles are the same.
So I suggest that, you know, when I was in manufacturing, part of the things you do, especially if you're involved in third-party accreditation schemes and what enforcement officers were looking at, you need a clear organisation structure that very clearly says who's accountable for what and what are your responsibilities and what are your roles. And I think that's where you embed it in an organisation, is with clear accountability, who's doing what. And most of the manufacturing systems that I've worked in or seen or audited really do accept the fact that these quality issues, these safety issues, are production issues, and that the technical teams, whether they're QA or technical managers or technical directors, are there to provide support and knowledge. So an interesting discussion there on the differences and the similarities between manufacturing and hospitality that we might pick up later, Richard. So thank you very much. Don't forget to share this type of message with other people. You can like it, you can share it, or as you say, when you're having a cup of coffee with your colleagues, it could be a conversation that you can engage with. So thank you very much for joining us, and goodbye.
Thanks, Sterling. Thanks, everybody. Bye.